Voc est certo, peo desculpas. Acqui esto texto limpo, sem formatao, querido y sem elementos desnecis rios. She was sold at dusk, when the wind carried the scent of dust and burned cedar. The man who took her payment didn't look her in the eyes. Neither did her husband, not once, not even when she pleaded with his silence. He simply walked back inside the tavern, arms around the waist of another woman, the sound of their laughter dissolving into the rustle of prairie grass. A coin purse, half a bottle of whiskey. That was the price for her. She stood barefoot, her belly heavy beneath the worn folds of her wool dress. The man who paid didn't speak Lakota, and she barely remembered the English she once heard in boarding school. He pointed toward a wagon and made a clicking sound with his tongue, like calling a dog. She didn't move, not until he raised a hand. Then she climbed up, knees trembling, back straight, jaw set like stone. She kept her eyes on the horizon, not the man beside her, not the red sky, not the boy watching from behind the saloon window. That boy was her son. He didn't know it. She hadn't told anyone. No one had asked. The wagon wheels turned, groaning under the weight of shame and pine wood. No one stopped them. No voice called out. Just the cold silence of a town too tired to care, too used to trading human flesh in plain daylight. As they crossed the edge of town, a crow flew low, screaming. She didn't look back. The trail led west, where the land turned golden and open, and the people grew scarcer than rain. Days passed. She bled once in her sleep, just a trace, enough to make her hold her belly in the dark and whisper in Lakota, "Don't leave me too." The man didn't touch her, not with his hands, but with his. Orders. Chop. Clean. Boil. Kneel. He didn't shout, only pointed and expected. He called her girl, sometimes thing. She spoke less each day, until one morning, frost on the ground, she found herself standing at a crossroads, literally and not. Two trails split. He took the southern path. She didn't. She ran. Pregnant, barefoot, weak but faster than fear. She ran until her legs gave out, until she collapsed beneath a dying tree, body curled around her unborn child, breath coming in sharp stabs. She was going to die. No name, no home, no one to remember her face. She closed her eyes, face turned to the earth, and waited. Then, footsteps, boots slow, measured, the sound of leather against frost-bitten grass. A shadow fell over her. She didn't open her eyes, but she heard him kneel. And for the first time in weeks, no command came. Only silence. And then a coat warm. Wool, worn gently laid across her shoulders. She thought maybe she had died. And this was mercy. She didn't dream that night. Only drifted half breath, half memory while the earth held her like a mother she'd never known. When she woke, it was to the crackle of firewood and the scent of something faintly sweet, dried berries, maybe, or burned sugar. Her mouth was dry, her fingers cold. The coat was still over her, tucked carefully beneath her chin. She was not alone. Across from her, a man knelt by the fire, stirring a tin pot, with the handle of a spoon worn smooth from use. He hadn't looked at her yet, not really. Only once earlier, when she'd groaned in her sleep. His eyes then dark, not cruel, but quiet, like they had seen too much and now looked inward more than out. He wore no badge, no guns across his chest, just a coat lined with dust and a scar that crossed the top of his right hand like a lightning strike caught in skin. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. She tried again. "Who are you?" His voice came after a pause, low and dry. "Doesn't matter." He placed a tin cup near her hand. Steam curled from it like breath. She didn't move. Her arms ached. Her back had stiffened. Like iron. He didn't insist. Just sat back on his heels, poured a second cup, and drank from it without flinching. "My name's W. Yaka," she said softly, not to him, not exactly, more to the fire. "They called me Mary after the mission school. But my name is W. Yaka." The syllables felt foreign in her mouth now, too long neglected. He said nothing, just looked up once and gave the faintest nod. Not approval, recognition. Something passed between them then. Not warmth, not trust. Something older, like snow meeting pine. She hadn't been called by her true name in years. Not by her husband. Not by the priests. Not by anyone since the day she'd been taken from the reservation under the promise of education and baptized with cold river water that had made her mother scream in silence. She hadn't screamed then. She hadn't cried when the man she married told her to stay in the barn when visitors came. She hadn't even cried when he sold her. But now, here, before this silent man and the flicker of drywood fire, she cried. Not loudly, not beautifully, but in shuddering breaths that refused to stop, like winter wind finally breaking through a wall. He didn't move closer, didn't reach out, just stoked the fire once, slowly, and waited. Not many white men would have known not to touch her then. He did. She stayed there 2 nights. On the 3rd, he handed her a blanket, pointed west, and said, "Cabin's 5 miles that way. If you want it, 5 miles." It could have been 50. Still, she walked. Each step like dragging the past behind her, tied to her ankle with twine. The cabin was smaller than she'd imagined. Built from timber, not stone, with a chimney that leaned left and a door that didn't close all the way. But it was dry and warm, and there was food inside. Not much, but enough. She slept with her back against the door that first night, and woke to birdsong. No footsteps, no shouting, no man breathing over her. Just the sound of wind through pine and the slow creak of old wood adjusting to the light. Her child moved. Not wildly, not with pain, but with presence. She placed a hand over the curve of her belly and whispered again in Lakota, "We are not gone yet." That day, she found a stream behind the cabin, kneeled, washed her face, her hair, her feet. There were scars on her thighs she hadn't noticed before. Faint, pale against copper skin, the kind that don't fade but stop hurting once you stop counting them. She didn't look away. That night, she lit her own fire. She didn't know if the man would come again. Didn't know if he'd expect something in return. Didn't care. She had built no place here. But the earth seemed to say, "Stay. Just stay." And for once she listened, he didn't come back the next morning, nor the one after, but his presence lingered. Not in footprints or food left behind, but in the silence. It wasn't empty anymore. It was the kind of silence that waits, not abandons. The kind that watches from the trees, breath held, heart open just enough to not run. On the 4th morning, when the frost had thinned and the water in the bucket no longer iced over at dawn, she saw him. He was chopping wood by the tree line. No announcement, no knock. Just there like a figure carved from the land itself. She stood in the doorway of the cabin, arms folded over her belly, watching. His axe moved slow, measured. Each swing sunk deep into the log, splitting it clean and true. He didn't look up, didn't speak, just kept working like the forest asked. Him too. She didn't call out, but she stepped off the porch and walked toward him. The hem of her dress caught twigs. A bird cried overhead. He stopped mid-swing, turned slightly only enough to show he knew she was there. "You live out here?" she asked. He nodded once, then turned back to the wood. "Why did you help me?" The axe dropped again, clean split. He let the log fall, then finally said, "Because no one else did." Simple, and heavier than any sermon. She didn't ask more, didn't need to. She gathered some of the chopped wood into her arms, even as the weight bent her knees. He didn't stop her, didn't offer to carry it. And she didn't want him to. That day, she cooked soup with roots she'd found and dried meat from his storage bin. She left a bowl by the tree. He didn't take it while she watched, but it was gone by dusk. Each day after, a quiet rhythm formed. She swept the floor. He split wood. She mended a torn blanket. He repaired the fence post she hadn't noticed leaning. She lit the fire. He brought more logs. They didn't share meals, but ate the same food. They didn't speak much, but listened to the same wind. Once, she saw him sit by the stream after sundown, boots off, sleeves rolled. He held something in his hands, a strip of leather, worn and frayed. She watched from a distance, unsure if he knew she was there. He didn't turn, but he let the leather fall into the water and watched it drift away. Some men bury things. Others let them go slowly, one grief at a time. She understood that kind. He never asked about the child. But once, when her back hurt and she winced lifting a pot, he took it from her gently, without a word, and poured the water himself. She whispered, "Thank you." He nodded, but didn't meet her eyes. Later that night, the wind howled hard against the cabin walls, and a tree cracked in the distance like a warning. She woke in the dark, hand on her belly, heart pounding. Then a knock, soft, twice. She opened the door slowly. He stood there holding a bundle of furs, thick and warm. "The cold's not done," he said. "This'll help." He started to walk away, but she reached for his arm. "Stay a while?" she asked, voice barely above breath. His jaw moved slightly. Then he stepped in, not as a man claiming space, but as someone offering shelter of his own kind. He didn't sit close, didn't touch her, just sat by the fire, watching the flames like they carried stories he hadn't told in years. She leaned back against the wall, watching him in return, not with fear, not even with hope, just watching. He looked over, finally, and said, "I had a daughter." Just that. No name, no age, no ending, just truth. She didn't press, only nodded, then said softly, "Then maybe you'll understand why I can't let this one die." The silence after wasn't cold. It was shared. Two griefs, sitting beside one flame, warming their hands without asking for more. Outside, the storm calmed. Inside, the fire didn't crack loud. It breathed. Like them, days passed like breath in winter slow, visible, then gone. They never named what they were building. It wasn't love, not yet. It wasn't safety, not fully. But it was something that made the mornings softer and the nights less sharp. She swept the cabin each morning, though the floor barely gathered dust. He repaired the barn door, though no livestock remained. They both pretended not to notice the effort the other made to stay. One morning, she found a folded bundle of cloth on the porch. Inside were 3 hand-stitched gowns. None new, all clean. She ran her fingers over the seams. They were stitched by someone who cared not for her, but for someone once loved. She pressed the fabric to her cheek and didn't cry. She only said thank you when she saw him at the stream. He didn't respond, but the next day there was soap. The day after that, a hairbrush. He never asked to enter the cabin. She never locked the door. One evening, as the sky bruised with dusk, she hummed a song her mother used to hum while brushing her hair beside the fire. It wasn't loud, but it reached him. He stood just beyond the open window, holding a bag of potatoes from the winter root pit. When the melody floated past the glass, he paused completely still, like a deer who hears something both familiar and painful. She didn't stop, just closed her eyes and let the tune finish. He placed the bag by the door and walked off without a word. That night, she dreamed of her mother's braids, long and soft and woven with sage. And in the dream, someone's hands were trying to learn how to do it again. The next morning, she woke to birdsong. He was already chopping wood. She stood on the porch, watched for a moment, then called out what was her name. He didn't stop, but after the 3rd swing, he said, June. The axe fell again. She died in spring. She your daughter or your wife? The pause stretched. Then both. She felt her breath catch, but said nothing more. That day, she hung the clean gowns out in the sun, and when the wind moved them gently, she imagined they danced, for the spirits who still remembered them. She cooked that night not just broth or stew, but something close to a meal. Flatbread with roots and herbs. She placed a plate by the barn, covered it with cloth, and walked away. He brought the empty plate back before dawn. The next evening, she found a bundle of sage on the windowsill, bound with blue thread. Lakota. Blue. She hadn't seen that thread since she was a girl at the edge of a sweat lodge, waiting for the women to emerge and call her into the circle. She took it into her hands slowly, reverently, like lifting memory itself. He'd gone into town for it. That much she knew. He had gone where the Lakota were not spoken of kindly, where her name would not be welcome. She whispered a prayer over it, tied it to her braid. That night, it snowed. Not harsh, but quiet, blanketing the earth in stillness. She sat by the fire, hand over her belly, and felt the child shift. Stronger now, like it had decided to live. She whispered to it, told it stories of the old ones, of wolves that guarded the lost, of wind that carried names back home. And when she looked up, he was there, standing just inside the door, not asking for warmth, but carrying it in. He didn't speak, just looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly took off his coat, hung it by the door, and sat down across from her. They watched the fire together, the silence between them no longer thick, just full, like soil before spring. That night, he didn't leave. He slept on the floor near the door, wrapped in a blanket she'd left out without thinking. When she woke at dawn, the snow still falling, she found him still there, still breathing, still choosing to stay. It was the sound of hooves that warned them. Not thunderous, not rushed, just steady, like a question asked again and again across the land. She was gathering water from the stream, knees in the snow, when the rhythm reached her ears. Her hand stilled. The sky was pale and still above her, but something in her bones stirred. The kind of knowing that doesn't need proof. Lakota blood knew when to listen. She stood slowly, eyes scanning the ridge. 3 riders. One led the others. By a full length. Tall. Broad. A green scarf around his neck and a hunting rifle slung to casually across his back. She knew the shape of that man's jaw before she could admit it to herself. Elijah. Her husband. No longer. But the man who had taken her name and sold it for coin. He had found her. She didn't run. Didn't scream. Just turned and walked fast and heavy back to the cabin. Her breath fogged the air. Snow crunched sharp beneath her boots. He was at the barn, stacking firewood. He looked up the second she reached. Him. They're coming, she said. He didn't ask who. He saw it in her eyes. He stepped past her, picked up the rifle, leaned against the barn door, not with panic, but with the care of someone cleaning a wound. They'll try to take me, she said. They'll say I belong to him. He didn't look at her. Didn't have to. I don't, she added. Not anymore. The wind shifted. The horses grew closer. He said only, stay inside. She didn't argue, but she didn't go far. She stood at the cabin window, watching as the riders crested the hill and slowed. Elijah dismounted first. Same hat. Same grin. Same rotten breath hiding behind honeyed words. Well, hell, he said, looking around. She's not dead. I owe myself $5. The cowboy said nothing. Elijah spat in the snow. You the one who stole her? Still nothing. The silence spread, thick, as blood in cold water. I paid good coin. Elijah went on, circling slowly. She had no right to run. That baby's mine. Might be. Don't matter. She was mine when I left her. She's not now, the cowboy said finally. Voice like gravel, pulled slow across a plate. Elijah's smirk slipped. The second man gripped his pistol. The third, boyish, nervous, shifted in his saddle. She's carrying my blood, Elijah snapped. You think that don't mean something out here? The cowboy didn't move. Didn't flinch. She's carrying life, he said. That's more than you ever did. The younger man shifted again, eyes flicking between the 2. Elijah stepped forward. You touch me, it's law you break. The cowboy tilted his head. I ain't touched you, he said low. Then added, but I've got 2 hands if you want to tempt me. The boy dismounted, uncertain. Looked to Elijah, then back at the cabin. She's Lakota, he muttered. Ain't right what we did. Elijah rounded on him. Shut up. Will. But it was too late. The spell of fear had cracked. The cowboy stepped forward, slow and certain, and said, There's nothing for you here but cold ground. Will backed up. The third man didn't speak. Elijah looked at the cabin, at the woman he'd once called wife, at the man who stood now between him and her. Something in his eyes changed. He spat again, this time closer, then turned. No woman's worth dying over, he muttered. The men rode off. She opened the door slowly. He stood there still, as if the snow hadn't settled around his boots, as if the world hadn't just paused and resumed. She didn't speak, didn't thank him, just walked out, bare feet pressing into snow, and placed her hand over his. Not clasping, just resting there. He didn't look at her, but his fingers turned, and for the first time, held hers the next morning. Word had spread. Not through letters or town criers, but through glances and whispers at the trading post, through a shopkeeper's raised eyebrow, through a ranch hand who didn't mean to say what he'd heard near the fire. She ran, they said, pregnant and wild. Left her man. They called her many names. None of them hers. The man didn't speak of it when he returned from town. Just placed a small sack of cornmeal on the shelf and handed her a length of cloth dyed, with ochre strong and soft, the color of earth after rain. For the child, he said. She nodded, folding it slow. That night, she heard it. The knock, but not on their door, on the chapel wall. 3 times. A summons. Sunday came with a sky like smoke and a wind sharp enough to make the pines lean. She knew what it meant. They wanted her present, wanted her shamed, in front of God and the people who thought they were holy. He stood by the window watching. Her braid her hair. She tied it with a blue thread, then added the ochre cloth beneath her shawl. I'll go, she said. I'll go with you. She turned. No, you've done enough. He didn't argue, but he didn't sit down either. The chapel was colder than the trail that led to it. She walked in alone. Heads turned. A few gasps. A child whispered, "That's her." The preacher stood near the altar, hands folded, mouth tight. "She returns," he said aloud, voice like a blade wrapped in velvet. And in what state? She didn't flinch, didn't speak, only stepped forward. "You were claimed," he went on. "Now you come unclean. And you wish to be seen as wife again?" Murmurs rose. Someone scoffed. Someone crossed themselves. She stood silent in the middle of it, until the door opened. Boots echoed across the floorboards. The cowboy stepped in. Not loud, but enough. He didn't speak, just walked straight down the aisle, and stopped beside her. Gasps again. Then he took her hand, held it up, turned to face the crowd, and said, clear as a bell on frost, "She's my wife now." Silence fell like snow on fire. "No paper says so," the preacher hissed. "No priest, no law, she's mine," the cowboy said, louder now. "Not because I took her, but because I chose her, and she chose to stay." He turned to her, eyes like dusk, steady and open. He kneeled slowly. "Marry me," he said, voice low, not for the crowd, just for her. She looked down, one hand on her belly, the other still warm in his. "Only if you take us both," she whispered. "I already did." He rose. She faced the preacher now, and for the first time in months, maybe years, she spoke not as someone asking to be seen, but as someone who already was. "You called me unclean," she said, "but this child, this life is not shame." She placed the preacher's hand over her belly. He flinched, then pulled away. "I was sold," she went on, "by a man who claimed God but feared blood. This man," she turned to the cowboy, "touched nothing of me until I was ready. He didn't take, he gave." She stepped forward. "This isn't a plea," she said. "This is my place now." They walked out together, hands clasped, heads high. Behind them, no applause, just the sound of wind against chapel walls. But outside a girl stood, barefoot, holding a flower. She placed it in the Lakota woman's palm and whispered, "My mama says you're the bravest." The woman knelt, placed her hand on the girl's cheek. "Your mama is right," she said, "about you." She stood again and walked home, not behind a man, not beside him, But with him, they didn't speak of marriage again. Not that night. Not the one after. They returned to the cabin as if nothing had changed, as if the words spoken before God and the stairs of an entire chapel hadn't cracked something open in the air between them. But it had. It was in the way he placed her tea near the bed without sound, and how she folded his shirts now, one by one, not to be useful, but to care. The world didn't cheer for them. It didn't throw rice or light lanterns in celebration. It snowed, and snow kept falling for 5 days. They stayed inside. They read nothing, spoke little, just watched the flames climb and curl, listened to the pop of sap escaping from logs like trapped memories. Sometimes she sang, low, without melody, without audience. He never asked what the words meant. But one morning, she caught him humming along. She looked up, surprised. He looked away, not ashamed, but caught. My wife, he said softly. She sang too. But not like that. Yours sounds older. She is, she replied. My voice came from many women. I'm only the last to carry it. He nodded. That evening, they cleaned out the cradle she hadn't dared touch before. It had dust in its corners and a loose leg. He fixed it without a word. She lined it with the ochre cloth. On the 7th day of snow, the wind changed, and with it came pain. It started beneath her ribs, deep and dull, like something remembered rather than begun. She tried to breathe through it, thought it might pass. It didn't. He was chopping wood again when she called out, not loud, not with fear, but with certainty. It's time. He didn't panic, just dropped the axe, ran. She was on the floor when he reached her knees on the rug, hands pressed to the earth like she was praying. He didn't ask what to do. She told him. Between gasps, between pain, he fetched hot water, torn sheets. He lit 2 more lanterns and closed the windows tight. She bit down once, hard, on her wrist to keep from crying out. Her breath came in sharp hisses, sweat on her brow. The storm outside raged. The storm inside burned. But then a sound, small, wet, alive. He froze. She turned her face, exhausted, eyes barely open. It's a girl, she whispered. And the girl screamed, cried, strong, whole. He took her, wrapped her, then paused. What do we call her? She smiled, though it took all the strength she had. Tat-ka-wi-pai, she said. Buffalo Star? She nodded. She came through the storm, just like the herds used to. Bold, wild, loud. He handed the child to her gently, then knelt at her side, head bowed. Not as a father yet, not as a husband, but as someone witnessing a beginning. And outside the snow stopped. A breeze came, and with it the faintest light from a sky clearing just above the ridge. They slept that night, all 3, beneath one roof. One fire, one name unspoken, but already true. Family. Spring came slowly that year. The snow didn't melt all at once. It withdrew like an old friend, hesitant, glancing over its shoulder, as if unsure if it was time to leave. The ground beneath revealed itself in pieces, wet patches of earth, stubborn frost, roots pushing toward light. The cabin stayed warm. He built a porch where the frost used to gather. She planted seeds beside it. Every morning, she stepped barefoot onto the wood planks, their grain now worn smooth by quiet footsteps and time. She'd wrap the child close to her chest, whispering songs that smelled of sage and memory. He carved a cradle from juniper, not because the old one was broken, but because some things are meant to be made new. She caught him smiling once, not a full smile, but something near the corner of his mouth, while the child kicked her tiny feet against his chest. "You look younger," she said. He didn't respond, but his hands, calloused and careful, tightened slightly around the child. "She knows you," she whispered. He looked down. She always did. He didn't speak, but he stayed awake longer that night, watching the stars through the window, listening to the breath of two lives now steady beneath his roof. Sometimes she would sing near the fire, and he would close his eyes not to sleep, but to remember the silence before her, how it had stretched and cracked, how it had once been the only voice he knew. One morning, he found her sitting by the stream, feet in the water, child asleep on her chest. Her braid brushed her shoulder, tied with blue thread and ochre ribbon. "Does she have your mother's name?" he asked. "She has mine." He nodded. "She'll carry your voice too. She already does." In town, they no longer whispered when she passed. They nodded, tipped hats. Some even smiled, shyly. They didn't forget what she was called before, but now they remembered what she had become. She taught some of the children Lakota words, planted herbs behind the chapel, carved small dolls from cedar, and gave them to girls who had no one to braid their hair. He built a bench near the stream. They sat there at dusk sometimes, his hand resting on hers, her cheek against his shoulder, not speaking of the past, but breathing in the present. Once the preacher passed by on horseback, slowed, watched, didn't speak, but raised his hand in a gesture of respect. The cowboy nodded once, and they went on watching the river. That night, she held the child in her arms, rocked her beneath the stars, and whispered the names of her grandmothers into her ear, names the child would one day carry like fire in her chest. At dawn, the child took her first step barefoot, steady, toward her father's outstretched hand, and he knelt to meet her. That morning, the cabin did not echo with silence. It hummed, soft, alive, whole. Since that day, no shadow ever lingered long at their door again. Only light, only wine through cottonwood trees, and a voice that whispered, "Always you are not what they called you. You are what you survived." Would you have stood between her and the man who sold her? Tell us in the comments what this story meant to you. And if you believe in second chances, subscribe to Silent Ranch.